This is the introduction to using the sampling proportion. Basically, when we're doing these problems, it's a binomial situation where you either have yeses or nos. You'll be given an x and an n, and from that, we need to figure out in the sample what proportion of the people said yes, or what proportion was successes. So that sample proportion, or p with a triangle over it, p hat, equals x, the number of people who fit we were looking for, over n, the number of people in the sample. If I look at the first example, x equals 30, n equals 40, so my p hat equals 30 over 40, which gives me 0.75. We now want to find what's the probability of getting this p hat value given that the population had this value as the proportion 0.8. So what we're going to need to do is find the z-score, use that z-score to find probabilities. This first section's only concerned with finding the z-score, but in the future when we're doing word problems, we're going to have to use the table to convert those to probabilities. So the general formula we'll be using for this z-score is z equals p hat, which is the proportion that we just solved for of the sample, minus p, which is the given population proportion, divided by the square root of p times 1 minus p over n. By far the hardest part is getting the square root part right. Remember, it uses the p that was given to you from the population, not the p hat that you calculated from the sample data. So if I'm finding this first z-score, z equals parentheses 0.75 minus 0.8 n parentheses divided by new parentheses, the root of new parentheses, 0.8 n parentheses, new parentheses, 1 minus 0.8 n parentheses divided by 40 n parentheses, n parentheses. This first one, I'm making a big deal out of all the parentheses I'm doing because honestly, that's the easiest way to make a mistake on these problems. When I put this into my calculator, 0.75 minus 0.8 divided by parentheses, the root of parentheses 0.8 times 1 minus 0.8 divided by 40. All of that goes in and it gives me negative 0.79. If you're putting this into your calculator and getting something different than negative 0.79, it absolutely is an issue with the parentheses. The hardest part is making sure this 40 is still occurring under that root. When I go to do problem number 2, again, I start by solving for p hat. That's x 9 over n 100. That gives me 0.09. I can then set up my z-score formula equals 0.09 minus 0.1 divided by the root of 0.1 times 1 minus 0.1 over 100. Again, I'm going to put this into my calculator, being very careful with where the parentheses go. Also being careful with place value, it's 0.09, not 0.9. I make sure that when I'm doing the root, I'm using the value of p, not p hat. So it's based on the 0.1, not on the 0.09. And I make sure that I'm dividing by 100, still under that square root. When I put all that in, I get a z-score of negative 0.33. For number 3, again, I start out p hat equals x over n. In my calculator, 60 divided by 140 gives me 0.42857. I'm going to round this and call this 0.43. I will say that in Cengage, it may give you some issues depending upon how the rounding goes, so you might want to include one more decimal. But as always, if you think you're doing the right process in Cengage, send it to me as an Ask Your Teacher. And if it's close and it's a rounding error, I'll send you what the right answer would have been. You can now set up the z-score. It equals 0.43 minus 0.38 over the root of 0.38, 1 minus 0.38 divided by the n of 140. Again, it takes a while to punch in carefully, so make sure that as you're putting it into your calculator, you're double checking that you have all your parentheses in the right place. This root on the bottom you can do separately, but again, it might be an issue of rounding, where if you don't round it the same way as Cengage, they'll give you issues. If we get back and take a paper test on this, I'm not as concerned with rounding, but obviously we're currently doing distance learning, so it has to be something you're a little more worried about. Here I get 1.218, which rounds to 1.22. Final problem in this section. Again, start out with p hat, 15 out of 250. If I do 15 divided by 250, it tells me 0.06. I then find my z-score by doing that 0.06 minus the given 0.05 over the root of the given 0.05 times 1 minus 0.05 all over the n of 250. .06 minus 0.05 divided by the root of 0.05 times 1 minus 0.05 divided by 250. When I put this in, I get a z-score of 0.725, which I round up and goes 0.73.